as well. So good morning, everyone. I'm Giacomo Persipaoli. I'm the head of the Security and Technology Program at UNIDIR, the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. It is a pleasure to welcome you this morning to our breakout session, and thank you for choosing to spend this time with us. We know that there are many sessions happening in parallel, so we're really grateful that you chose this panel among all of the others. Today we're going to be presenting you and really dig a little bit deeper into one of our latest initiatives, the Roundtable for AI Security and Ethics. I will take a few moments to introduce you both UNIDIR, for those of you that are not familiar with the Institute, as well as REAIM itself, just to give a little bit of a context into how it came to be and what is the purpose of the entire initiative. And then we will, most of this conversation, you will hear very little from me, which is great, given my voice, but you will hear a lot from the panel. The idea is really to hear from the perspectives of those experts that have been involved in this roundtable to really illustrate what are some of the various themes and key aspects that have emerged throughout the discussion. So, as I mentioned, REAIM, how we call it, Roundtable for AI Security and Ethics, is the latest initiative that is being launched by UNIDIR and Microsoft. I will spend the next few minutes just to introduce you UNIDIR. So who are we? We're kind of a very, I want to say, very interesting organization in the sense that we're kind of unique in the UN system. We are an independent or autonomous institution within the whole UN system. Sometimes, for short, you see on the slide the full description, but for short, we use the expression, we're basically a UN think tank. So we're an independent research organization within the UN system that has really been set up. Next year is going to be our 45th anniversary, so it was been set up in 1980, with the purpose of conducting independent research on pressing global security challenges, really to support the informed participation of member states in all of the UN disarmament processes. Of course, the way in which we're implementing our mandate, which was given to us in 1980, has of course been evolving as the whole global security context has been evolving around us. And it is in this evolving context that in 2019, UNIDIR established the Security and Technology Program that I have the pleasure and honor of leading, to really work at the intersection between international peace and security and emerging technologies. Now, emerging technologies can mean many things, many different things to many different people, but specifically to our program, some of the main areas of our focus are cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, autonomy, and now, going forward, probably increasingly work on quantum, etc. So we're really trying to understand within the parameters of our mandate, what are the international peace and security implications of these emerging and potentially disruptive technologies. What we do, research is in our name, and it's also our core business. Research is the bread and butter. We're a research-based and evidence-based institute within the UN, but research is not the only thing that we do. I would say that having this hybrid nature of being a UN organization, so having a foot in the UN system, but at the same time having a foot out of the UN system by being independent, meaning we do not need a mandate from member states like other UN agencies to do our work. We received our mandate when we were established in 1980, and then we have the academic freedom of choosing our own research agenda. So that's a very powerful position to be, because it allows us to really leverage this unique nature to convene stakeholders in a way that probably no other UN organization can do. So our convening power, in addition, that complements and supplements our research effort, is also one of our main activities. We convene states, of course, being our primary target audience, but we also use our position to establish and build bridges between different stakeholder communities. Industry being one, particularly when we're talking about emerging technologies, is definitely a key stakeholder, but also civil society, academia, etc. So we're really making a deliberate effort in making sure that through UNIDIR, the perspectives, the expertise that resides outside of states and in the context of emerging tech it's significant, can find its way into the multilateral processes. And in a way, this is why RAISE kind of found its home at UNIDIR as well. And then the last pillar of our work is capacity building. So we really believe in the power of enabling states to participate in an informed way in the multilateral processes around emerging technologies. And we realize the significant knowledge asymmetry that exists in this field, with states that, the discussion tends to be dominated by those states who are kind of at the frontier of the development or adoption of these technologies. But when it comes to the UN and the multilateral system, history teaches us that when things work, it's because they've been co-created and co-developed by a very wide base of member states. And that's where our capacity building work comes into play. So, related to what I just said, the multi-stakeholder perspectives, if we zoom into the topic of AI in the military domain, and more specifically responsible AI in the broader context of security and defense, I think it is even more relevant that we look at the expertise, the knowledge that resides in the multi-stakeholder community. There are, of course, and we heard it yesterday, and probably will continue to hear it today, there is no one single dominant narrative that kind of resides in the stakeholder community, other than probably responsible AI in the military domain. It's a good thing, but how that translates in practice, there are a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different experiences, a lot of different priorities that are given to this whole very important topic. So having a multi-stakeholder perspective really enables us, but also policymakers, to understand what are the different kind of criticalities, the different points that they should be really focusing on. We also believe that there was a need. We've seen in the last, I would say, 18 months, if we go back to the first REAIM summit in February 2023, we've seen a proliferation of state-led initiatives. States have unpacked AI or are continue to unpack AI, whether it's from a safety perspective or from a responsible AI perspective. We had two General Assembly resolutions, so states have really taken a very active and proactive role in trying to shape governance of this very powerful and transformative technologies. But what we've also witnessed in parallel is that there hasn't really been a structured way for the multi-stakeholder community to feed into these governance processes. Of course, the Secretary General has established the high-level advisory body on AI that by design is multi-stakeholder, you would argue, but that kind of, it's a very, it has been designed and set up with a very specific mandate. So what was missing was a broader platform to really be able to capture all of this diversity. We also wanted to provide and recognize the importance of evidence-based governance. That is music to our ears. We're a research organization. We're not in the business of necessarily, we're not an advocacy organization. We don't have an agenda that we're pushing for. We're not, quote unquote, selling opinions. We do not necessarily rely on opinion pieces, etc. We are an evidence-based research organization. So for us, it was really important to create a platform that would allow us to strengthen the evidence base that could support the design of effective governance solutions. There was also a strong need to try at least to add a little bit of clarity to the distribution of roles and responsibilities. So if everyone agrees that responsible AI is important, then the next question is, okay, so who does what? So who is responsible for what in this context? What is the role of industry? What is the role of states? What is the role of civil society, etc.? So really having a little bit of clarity around this distribution of roles and responsibilities was one of the key reasons why we started to work on this idea of creating a dedicated platform. Of course, there is the importance that having a meaningful multi-stakeholder engagement brings to building trust, particularly public trust in the whole process. And it fundamentally, it's the last point on the slide, but I think it's, in spirit and in principle, it's the first. I think that there is, in general, the recognition that there is a lot that can be learned just from talking to each other. And REAIM is a perfect example. Already, it was a year and a half ago, and it continues to be today, of how just providing an opportunity for representatives from different stakeholders communities to come together and share views, it's already, offers tremendous value. So if you package all of these together, that's why, with the support of Microsoft, we launched earlier this year, in March specifically, RAISE, the Roundtable for AI Security and Ethics. We're still, this is, still the pilot phase, if you want. We've been operating for 6 months now. But the idea was really try to bring together experts and thought leaders from, first of all around the world. We wanted to be geographically representative and diverse, but also different stakeholder communities. And we really try to leverage this initiative to lay the foundation for what robust global AI governance could look like, grounded in cooperation. And you see the principles on the slide: cooperation, transparency, and mutual learning. The overall idea is to leverage this platform and the recommendations that in time it will produce to foster and facilitate compliance with international law and ethical norms. So we know that there is a growing number of frameworks that have been developed, some by industry, some by civil society, when it comes to responsible and ethical AI practices. In the security and defense domains, probably less so, just because as a sector in itself, it's a little more sensitive to work in. But we hope that through our effort, we will contribute to add also some form of reference frameworks for this specific domain. So what we've done so far was, where are we at today? Despite being active only for 6 months, I think that we were really fast in delivering at least a first very concrete outcome. We've met, the inaugural meeting was earlier this year in northern Italy, and I swear it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm Italian. It just happened to be there. And we met again last week here in Seoul. We were hosted by Naver. So it was really allowed us to get together and try to unpack what do we really mean with AI in the military domain, in the security domain more broadly, and what are some of the key priority areas of priority themes that we should start at least focusing our attention on. We realize that this is a very fast evolving field, so what we think today are the key priority themes may not necessarily be the priority themes of tomorrow, but we needed to start somewhere because we wanted to be able to deliver impact. And within this context, here we go. We came up with these 6 priority themes. Building a knowledge base. I'm just going to go through them all quickly, and then perhaps we will unpack them as part of the next part of the session. So I'm not going to be spending too much time on them. But building a knowledge base was identified as a key priority, as well as building trust. Really trying to unpack what we mean with the human element, and we've chosen human element on purpose because we've heard many words associated with human. Depending on different fora, you can have human control, human judgment. We just captured all of those different nuances with the human element. We think that you cannot really talk about AI without talking about data, and this has been overlooked or not really received a lot of attention in the last 12 to 18 months. As well as you cannot really talk about responsible AI practices without looking at the entire lifecycle management of an AI system. And last but not least, destabilization, which is kind of more of an effect than a theme in itself. But we were really keen on capturing the overarching risks for destabilization, the risks to broader global stability that AI could bring in different ways, right? So there is the piece that relates more to the information domain and AI used for influence operations, but that's not it. We see potentially supply chains issues and access to compute or access to chips also being a potential driver for state competition and potentially a driver of stability or lack of. The 6 themes. This is a day of launching. So we have launched on Friday last week, and you can download it using the QR code. If you can scan it through Kazuo's head, but it's okay. You can also go on our website. We've launched last Friday the policy brief. That does, that explains in much more detail than what I just did, what these 6 themes are and why we think they are important. But of course, as I said, RAISE is an evolving practice, an evolving initiative, and we're already thinking about where we want to take it tomorrow. So it started and will continue to maintain its nature of being inclusive of different stakeholders communities, different regional organizations and regions in the world. But in addition to these meetings, we will be adding potentially, we're looking to add 2 more pillars. First and foremost, we would like to do more at the regional level. We've seen even in the context of REAIM how the regional consultations that were conducted in the lead up to this summit really added a very important regional nuances and a level of granularity that is very difficult to capture unless you go to the region. AI is very context dependent. The risks, the opportunities are they have to be conceptualized and contextualized in different regions. So we want to take RAISE to various regions, and we also realize that the topic is so vast that unless we keep growing our group, even if we could expand the size of our group indefinitely to hundreds or thousands, we would probably always be finding a niche topic that somehow escapes the expertise that we have. And for this reason, we will be launching as of next year a new flagship event, RAISE conference. The inaugural session, you're the first ones to hear it, will be held in Geneva in spring. Date and venue TBC, but please follow us on our website and you'll find all of the information. And the idea there is really to have 2 tracks, an academic track that will be open to all academics that are doing work in this field. And by academic, I mean both like social sciences, but also the tech community, the scientists that are developing the technology. And we will have a policy track, so a track dedicated to policymakers, not only to keep talking to each other. They have already a lot of platforms that they can use to talk to each other, but we're really interested in the cross-pollination that may occur between the academic and the policy community. So more on that in the months to come, but please do keep this in mind and consider when we're going to be issuing a call for proposals to submit your proposal for this conference. The idea is really to be able to support multilateral processes. We as UNIDIR, that's kind of our primary arena, if you want, the multilateral environment, but that's not the only one. We applaud and really support regional initiatives that are aimed at bringing together states from a region or a sub-region to really help bring everyone along the journey of establishing effective AI governance measures. And we want to make sure that we're able to help that, and when needed, we're also ready to support at the national level. With that, I'm going to transition, and there will be time for Q&A at the end, so please do not hesitate to ask any questions that you may have. We're now seamlessly transitioning to the second phase of this, the second part of this panel. we're going to be having a conversation. You see a very large panel in front of you, and I promise you'll hear from each one of them. Really trying to unpack some of these themes. These are all distinguished experts that have participated in our first two REAIM meetings. We will introduce them one by one as we go through the panel, but we'll be really interested in hearing from them and their perspectives. The way this is going to work, we're just going to go across the panel with a question and maybe a follow-up, but then the floor is really open for you to intervene. And with that, also, as I relocate myself to the chair and not standing at the podium, I'm going to ask Michael from Microsoft our kind of first question. So in Bellagio, in our inaugural meeting, the group established the importance of building knowledge and the knowledge base, specifically because of the understanding that today approaches on even some of the most fundamental terms or concepts, such what is autonomy, what is AI, are so different across cultures, regions, and agencies, as well as different sectors. So building this knowledge base will really help navigate this kind of ocean of different approaches, as well as try potentially to identify some commonalities. So do you think that this is sustainable in the long term? And by that I mean, do you think that the international community can continue to operate on a let's agree to disagree basis when it comes to definitions and key concepts?
Thank you, Giacomo, and thank you for Unity's leadership in this space, and thank you, of course, to our hosts at the REAIM Summit. The brief answer to your question is no. The longer answer to your question would be, as I think we all recognize, AI is an incredibly fragmented and complex space, particularly in the military domain, and so nation states do have very varied strategic priorities, legal traditions, and cultural values. Hence, there are these divergent definitions of even fundamental foundational topics. And whilst diversity is inevitable and can be a good thing, it's also a significant barrier to meaningful governance discussions. We need a common ground, because otherwise operating indefinitely on a Thank you very much. Might seem practical in the short term. It's just not sustainable in the long term. Disagreements over fundamental terms will slow down progress and hinder cooperation. And so if we don't have some form of shared understanding, it will be challenging to navigate quite complex negotiations and policy formulations here at REAIM, United Nations, other multilateral and multi-sector forums. And that's especially true when it comes to AI's military applications. So agree to disagree is clearly insufficient, because there is a risk of divergent definitions. If different countries interpret core concepts differently, then how do we ensure we are working towards common goals, whether it's transparency, accountability, or traceability? There is, of course, room for nuanced convergence. And what I mean by that is, rather than pushing for universal definitions that we may never reach, something like RAISE, the Roundtable for AI Security and Ethics, and the broader international community can aim for nuanced convergence, which means accepting that there will always be some differences, but finding ways to build frameworks that allow for flexibility while fostering enough consensus to ensure cooperation and compliance is a good goal to have. And this is where I think we really need a shared and authoritative knowledge base. That's really the path forward. We need a living knowledge base. And this is really where RAISE comes in. By building a knowledge base, we can capture and navigate the various approaches and definitions that already exist and that will emerge in due course. And of course, a knowledge base shouldn't be rigid. You don't want rigid, static, universal definitions. Instead, it's better to have something which is structured in a way for stakeholders to understand and engage with other different perspectives that are out there. And this way, we can operate with more informed flexibility rather than just perpetual disagreement. We also need to move beyond just definitions. Crucially, the knowledge base, which I think RAISE seeks to create, isn't just about definitions, it's also about capacity building, very much core to the mission at Unity. Because by documenting different approaches, we can foster understanding, build trust among various stakeholders, and pave the way forward for meaningful governance discussions, even where consensus on terminology is currently elusive.
Thank you, Michael. And you kind of already answered my follow-up question, which is really focusing on what can RAISE add to this? What is the role that RAISE can play? If you can just in a minute try to summarize, where do you see a pathway to impact specifically for RAISE on this topic?
Sure thing. So I think as you very well laid out, those sort of three pillars for RAISE going forward, the desired three pillars. Of course, the key activity here is facilitating dialogue. RAISE offers a neutral platform for diverse stakeholders, of course, government, industry, civil society, academia, to come together and share their perspectives and explore solutions. And one outcome of that dialogue can be building trust through the knowledge base. So RAISE will seek to build a living lexicon of concepts and a taxonomy of risks. And that will provide a common reference point that helps actors see where they agree and where they diverge. That in turn fosters transparency and builds trust needed for productive multilateral dialogue. But of course, importantly, identifying convergence points can guide policy alignment. RAISE helps to identify areas of potential convergence, in other words, a common ground, where stakeholders can start to align their governance approaches. And by highlighting these areas, I think we can guide policy discussions in ways that build consensus while still respecting national differences.
Thank you, Michael. I'm now giving the mic and the floor to my colleague Yasmin.
Thank you, Giacomo. I wanted to turn to you, Ms. Xiaochen from CISS Tsinghua University. So, and building up a little bit on the question that was asked to Michael, the differences in understandings and the frictions that may eventually come out of these differences is known as constituting a challenge to building trust across geopolitical divides. And I think that's something that Michael alluded to as well earlier. And I know that you have led on a really important track to bilateral dialogue between the Tsinghua University and Brookings on AI in security and defense. So I was wondering if you can share a little bit more what makes track to engagement so attractive on such sensitive issues, and how can track to engagement help overcome geopolitical divides and make the conversations meaningful and impactful?
Okay, thank you, Yasmin. Thank you for having me here, and it's my true honor and pleasure to be part of the RAISE. And also thank you for mentioning our track to dialogue, which I personally took a lot of time and energy into it. Actually, we started the dialogue as early as 2019. At that time, the political tension was not that severe, and we started to have the dialogue with the Brookings on AI in international security, which both of us believed that it is really a very important issue. I think it is. Your question is really good, attractive, and effective. First of all, I think it is really, the track to dialogue can touch upon those sensitive and really difficult issues which track one dialogue may not be able to deal with when the trust is really low between the two countries. So we do not have that burden. So between the track two, we have people from different backgrounds. We can not only U.S.-China relations, but also AI technologists, and also people from the academia and business. So we are able to talk with each other on those very sensitive issues. And the second is that I believe it is interesting and effective because it helps us to build an academic community on this important issue. Because when we started the dialogue, AI in military domain is a very new area. We approach to many people who are doing either research in AI or researching AI governance, but they seem to be a little bit far away from the defense or military side. So we try to build the academic community in China. So based on their knowledge and based on their expertise, and after 5 years of effort, we were able to have a very thorough study and research on this. And the last but not the least, I think it is really an important process. The track to dialogue is a process to find, between the two countries, to find a common a consensus on some of the important issues. For example, at the very beginning, it is really difficult to identify what kind of problems we should focus on. Then, based on few rounds of dialogues, we have already done 10 rounds of dialogues, but about at dialogue 4 or 5, we began to identify that we need a common language. So we think it is really important to develop a common glossary on AI terminology, especially in military domain. So we put a lot of effort in doing that. And we just published the glossary, both we CISS published our own glossary and the Brookings passed their glossary, but on the same terms. So it is really important to build a common language when we trying to have dialogues on this. So these are the interesting aspects I think Track 2 can bring into these sensitive issues. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think, I mean, you know, it's impressive that you started in 2019. And it's been 5 years, so you were one of the veterans, so to speak, of the Track 2 dialogue on AI in security and defense. But, you know, and perhaps RAISE is also among them, but, you know, as sort of Track 2 initiatives start to proliferate and mushroom across the landscape, I was wondering if you could share quickly what you think makes RAISE unique among all of the initiatives?
Yes, I think there are a few points. First is the multi-stakeholders, as Michael already mentioned. I'm able to meet people from different backgrounds, and we have very frank and candid discussion during our race discussion. And the second is multilateral. We have people from different countries, and we focus on specific problems and try to bring our own perspectives into the discussion. And the third thing is the, I think, also it was mentioned at the very beginning, is the because UNIDIA is a research-based institute, so we have the knowledge. I mean, people in the race are really intelligent, so we have very a knowledge-based discussion and evidence-based discussion, which really thought-provoking for me. And last but not the least is, I think, is a balanced and a neutral provide a balanced and a neutral platform, which is really in bad need in the geopolitical situation right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I would like to turn to Keith from Fujitsu. One of the follow-up projects that we have in mind after the release of the policy brief is the release of a series of essays that do deep dives on each of the themes. And Keith, you are the co-author of the essay that we currently producing on the human element. Now, if you would like to give a little teaser for the audience here, it is a very thought-provoking piece, so it's going to be, I'm really be interested in your reactions and your views. But you covered, among many other things, the limitations of the concept of meaningful human control that is we hear so often, and it's so potentially even overused in the context of military AI discussions. So can you elaborate a little bit more, and what would be a good and viable alternative approach to address the human element?
Yeah, so thanks, Giacomo, and thank you everyone for being here. I think the first thing that we do is we call for specificity. We're not worried about meaningful human control in all elements of AI systems. I'll give an example. In 1991, in the first Gulf War, the US military deployed a system called DART, the Dynamic Analysis and Replanning Tool. That was an AI and machine learning tool to enable logistics for the first Gulf War. I don't think we care any more than we care when we order from Amazon, whether there is in that fulfillment a human or not. And I don't think there are any major ethical or legal concerns around it. So the first thing is when we talk about human control or meaningful human control, we should be specific on where we want it. The second case that we lay out in that paper is that we argue that although it is true that current machine learning systems are black box systems, so are many human decisions. And secondarily, that we have a way to hold people to account even when that is the case. So under international law, delegation for the use of lethal force rests with the government. Government decides who to delegate it to. And if we first of all think about AI or machine learning as a tool, whenever we use any kind of tool, it's the person using the tool that is held responsible. And so meaningful human control rests with the person who's delegating authority. And what that person has to do is they have to make sure that tool is going to function in the way that they expected it to. And that's true whether you're using a weapon that has to have a certain degree of accuracy, for example. So too, if you're using an AI tool, whether it's a lethal autonomous weapons system or some kind of recommendation or analysis engine, what you're responsible for as the person using that tool is to make sure that it's going to operate in accordance with international law. And if it does not, then you would be liable for, ethically and legally liable for the breach of that law. And therefore, international humanitarian law is already more than sufficient to cover the full range of use cases that we're talking about, so long as we're still talking about the current narrow AI applications. In the last part of the essay, we talk about trying to exercise meaningful human control over AGI or XAI systems, so systems that match or exceed human intelligence in the vast majority of human domains. I think even there, though, whilst there are many other concerns around it, the idea of meaningful human control still rests ultimately, unless we've replaced state leaders with AI, still rests with the government that delegate the authority to those machines to then go and make decisions. You've got to track, well, how many false positives and false negatives do they come up with? How accurate is it? What parameters have I delegated? That's the same as today when we use the current military instrument, which is largely, they're not exclusively human. We deploy that military, we set parameters that they're expected to work within, and we expect those people to be compliant with international law. So too for AI systems. So the beauty, the simplicity and the efficacy of current international law and international humanitarian law as it applies to the use of lethal force and the use of the military instrument is its simplicity. And what we worry about in the essay is that we have a kind of a multiplication of confusing terms which ultimately are not helping us. What we need is much clearer guidance on how the current law applies to the kind of systems that we're talking about.
Thank you for that. And you can expect what kind of follow-up question I'm gonna ask now. But we have witnessed, particularly if the discussions around AI in the military context more broadly are relatively recent. If we zoom into the discussion on lethal autonomous weapon systems, they've been going on for more than a decade. And one of the most kind of contentious issue is exactly different national approaches to the concept of human control or human element more broadly. So where and how you think that an initiative like REAIM could really make a difference for issues like these ones?
So I think Michael and you earlier spoke about the knowledge base. I think that's key. In the knowledge base, one of the areas we might start is being very clear on what we're not worried about. So we might start with logistics, which I think are not a major international concern or ethical concern. And then we could move on to, say, human resources and recruitment and retention and career management in militaries. I don't think we're worried about those things. And by putting a whole series of things out of scope, we might then help to narrow the scope. So I think the knowledge base might start via the kind of via negativa and getting rid of those things we don't want to talk about. I think another area is perhaps over time through the kind of multi-stakeholder and multinational dialogue that Qian spoke about, is drafting the kind of guidance that might explain how current international humanitarian law could be applied even to the most advanced systems that we're envisaging. And as a kind of, I don't know if it's track 2 or track 1.5, those terms confuse me, but whatever it is, UNIDIR that was able to come up with a draft that provided that guidance might be the kind of thing that could ultimately move to a much more productive conversation across large forums like REAIM.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Giacomo. So now I wanted to turn to Quito, who is just next to me. So I know that you're also one of the co-authors of the essays, and Quito is specifically looking at the essay on data practices, and because as an independent, that's one of the key topics that she's working on. And I was wondering, why do you think that it's important that discussions on AI in the military domain covers data in the first place, and in what ways? Because I think Giacomo alluded to earlier that it's kind of the neglected child a little bit. And because there's so much overlap between the civilian and the military realm, with the lines being increasingly blurred between the two, to what extent are data issues discussed in the civilian domain relevant to the military domain, and in what ways?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Yasmin. So I think I want to just start by stating the obvious, that data is the building blocks of artificial intelligence systems. Text, audio, images, video, geolocation data, those are all used in data sets that inform machine learning models, for instance, AI systems. And so data is a very key component to artificial intelligence. And so because it's a foundational element or foundational issue, I think that's why it's often left out of these conversations when we speak about AI. And so as we've witnessed yesterday and today, and I think we'll continue to speak about it during the summit, there's increased use of AI within the military, and it's particularly because of the attractiveness of AI, its precision, its ability to improve and to scale up key or strategic or critical military operations such as intelligence or surveillance. But these benefits, or so-called benefits, are also prone to key issues or challenges. So the first is that, depending on the kind of data they use, your AI system could precisely reflect biases or discrimination, or it can surveil in a very pervasive way, in a manner that is not coherent with international humanitarian law or human rights law. And so these benefits are kind of blurred, or the use of AI is kind of blurred. And so when we talk about data within the military, I think we need to first of all, respect the confidentiality of information used within the military, but as well as practice within the civilian space. We've seen that transparency and to the kind of data that we use and the quality of data is very important in recognizing the kind of biases and the type of discrimination and challenges that come up with respect to data. And if we speak about data within the military, I think we should be speaking about what are the practices that are being carried out. How are militaries acquiring data sets, or how are they acquiring AI systems, and how are those AI systems trained, and what kind of data are they trained on? Another important issue, I think, is thinking about the proportionality of existing military operations. So if there's a threat within the, a certain threat that the military is concerned about, what is the appropriate, proportional level of surveillance that can be practiced by the military? And so I think that also teethers into privacy. So, surveillance is not, yes, you have targets, but I think the way that AI systems are collecting data, or the data sets that are being used for this, they're collecting data in a very pervasive way. And sometimes civilians are also targets of these surveillance operations. And so I think the kind of, with the paper that we're looking at, we are discussing that we should use cases sort of to say, how are people collecting data? Two, who are the people who are collecting data? So is the military itself collecting data? And if not, who are they acquiring this data from? If it's the private sector, and not if it is the private sector, it is the private sector. And so what practices are they, taking on to collect data? Is the quality of data free of biases? Can we, for instance, look back and say, okay, this data is labeled in a certain way? I think throughout this summit, people have been mentioning that AI machines are not the ones that are biased, and they are not the ones that are harmful. But the way that we collect data and the way that we label data can reflect our biases and our discrimination. And so those practices, how are we seeing, what are the practices within the private sector controlled, and how are they standardized? And I think just to to sum up, we should look at within the your question on this, what is happening within the civilian space is that we're really looking at, we've seen people trying to design technologies that have privacy by design, for instance. We're looking at technologies that are less pervasive. So I know that one of my colleagues, I used to be at the Mozilla Foundation, she's been looking at auditing data sets. And so she's been looking at, what are the kind of like narratives that are around, or narratives around data within the private sector. And, often when people speak about biases, the response from private sector is more data. More data means more accuracy. And she found that that's not, the case. Scalability does not mean less data. And so it's more about being intentional about which kind of data that you use, how you label it, and who you have in the team. I think the teams that are developing data sets, or they are collecting data sets, should also be diverse to determine, what are we missing out, what should we include, and so forth.
Thank you, Kito. And just a quick follow-up question, and perhaps in 1 minute. You sort of alluded to the fact that there's a lot of overlap between with the private sector, and I think one of the things that we've struggled with a little bit at REAIM when we're reaching out to industries and civil society is that when we look at REAIM and start talking about security and defense, they were a bit reluctant because they're like, oh, but the military, this is so sensitive. We're not doing anything on military. We don't want to engage with you, and that's a big trouble. That's a big struggle that we're facing, and we're not really sure on how to address it. Can you think of some sorts of incentives as to why you think that this industry should be joining the party?
That's a very good question, and I want to think about it as in a different way, because I think yesterday, witnessing everyone speak about AI in the military, it is spoken as if it's a new topic. The issues, the risks around AI is spoken as if it's a new issue, but also specific. I mean, the military domain is very different from civilian, the civilian case, but there's a lot of knowledge already existing within the civilian space, and I think the military domain could learn a lot from that. And while civilians could be, or other groups could be reluctant to join the space, it's not, I think, it's not their fault, because these spaces are often quite hard. But I think that's also the benefit of REAIM, that it brings together different stakeholders and also organizations. And so it's kind of the incentive to say that we're creating this space which is maybe perhaps not neutral, tries to be neutral, but it's a space that we bring together people within the military domain, but also people within the civilian, and to realize that there's much to be learned from civilian organizations.
Thank you, Yasmin and Kito. And I now would like to turn to Alexi from the SCRC. So in 3 minutes, can you please solve the lifecycle management for us issue? One of the key themes that we looked at is lifecycle management. And during our first meeting in Bellagio, you brought up a very interesting point, which is most of the discussions, even if everyone says lifecycle is important, most of the discussions so far have focused either on the use and deployment, and increasingly in the kind of pre-deployment, so development, testing, evaluation, etc. But very little attention has been given to the end of the life cycle. So would you like to elaborate a little bit more on this point?
Thank you, Jacques. I'll do my best to solve the question in 3 minutes, which I'd somewhat of a challenge, but I'll try. I think to start, I kind of want to justify the reason why looking at the end. I'm a very visual learner, so the life cycle of AI was quite an attractive concept to be able to effectively visualize what is a very complex dynamic and process. But what became very apparent the more we were talking about it and looking at it is that although we've cordoned off sections, and that those sections and components of the life cycle are broadly understood and agreed upon with some variation, there's not too much attention given to the components or rather the process of moving from one of those sections to another, the handover, as it were. There's also very little attention given to the impacts of different ownerships of parts of that life cycle, and there's almost none given to what happens at the end of it. We talk of it as a cycle, as if it gets to the end and begins again, and it's assumed to do so. The life cycle of AI as a term implies longevity. In fact, it potentially implies an unending return of investment, that it simply keeps going. But is that actually the case? So the more we thought about this and considered this, we came up with the fact that actually those interstitial spaces between components of the life cycle are actually quite critical, particularly when you consider that this is a production or a chain of events which is not actually generally owned by one single entity. It's often in itself multi-stakeholder and multilateral, which means that the knowledge base isn't shared. The concepts, the very ideas of what attribution, security, stability, auditability are very different from the technical to potentially the policy and the governance, which might sit in different parts of this life cycle. They may sit in different regions and different countries, depending on who you're commissioning for your data purchasing, your brokering, or through your training, through your testing, which means that actually in order to ensure whether you're getting the end product you want, you need to understand every component of that life cycle and how it's shifting from one to the other. It's also not quite as straight line, or rather a circle, as you might think. It has to be self-referential. When we started trying to work out how does an AI or an AI system reach, or a tool, reach the end of life, we realized that actually you can only conclude something's reached its end of life if you have a very firm grasp of how it began its life, the middle of its life, its kind of middle-age crisis, and then how it ends. Because if you don't understand the limitations and the parameters of training and its limitations of what is an acceptable outcome, how can you assess that something has degraded naturally or intentionally to the point that it has reached the end of its life? You also need to understand that the ownership model is going to change the nature of what end of life is. If it's something which you're very lucky as a state, or maybe a non-state actor, that you have owned the entire life cycle, potentially it's much easier for you to then replace something once you have effectively assessed that it's reached the end of life. You own the entire life cycle, so the cost and time and skill is all yours to dictate. However, if in standard procurement terms, actually, you now need to reinvest in 2, 3, 4, or maybe 5 different processes to even begin developing your replacement, that creates an all new set of concerns and risks. And that's all before we consider that we talk about our life cycle as if it's a natural process, and this is just a thing that happens. And we know models do degrade over time. The iterative design process, particularly the constant learning processes, sometimes go off down very strange rabbit holes, which we have to roll back and go, actually, that's not where we wanted to go. IBM Watson being a great example of that a couple of times. But what we now find, and we need to accept, that these tools, as they become so critical, particularly in the defense and military domain, they themselves will be the target at every component of their life cycle. So we need to be able to understand when is something reaching end of life, even before it's reached deployment or being used perhaps in the field. It might have been intentionally, maliciously targeted to undermine its effect. From the ICRC's perspective, the last thing we want to see is something which has been undermined intentionally or through poor design processes, reaching the point where it's deployed into the field and therefore potentially is incapable of being compliant with IHL, let alone can't be used in a manner if it's done effectively within doctrine.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, in just a minute or so, by design, if we're talking about life cycle management, it's a very interdisciplinary, field that really combines technical, legal, policy, ethical, and the whole set of disciplines. So, how do you think that an initiative like REAIM can help adding clarity to this field?
Well, I actually think it speaks to a number of the questions and follow-up problems that have come across all of this. Is that we use the term multi-stakeholder and multilateral, but there's actually another couple of multis on top of that. The disciplinary separation between different types of science is extreme. The communities and cultures around that is incredibly large as well. We had discussions just in our RAISE meeting this week about we actually have to take some of this process to where technologists are. We can't expect them to come to us because they're not going to, because there's an expectation that our culture is incompatible with theirs. Perhaps there's an expectation we don't have anything to teach them. There's definitely a lot that they could teach us, but we need to find that common ground. And I think that RAISE, in the approach it's taken to the two multi-types that we're aware of, has a much greater opportunity in space to go where they are and hopefully bring them back as well. So I'm encouraged to see us kind of going in that direction.
Thank you.
So I'm conscious of time, but Ginger, I wanted to ask you like a very difficult question for 3 minutes only, as well. And it's even worse than Alexia, I would say. So I wanted to talk to you about destabilization. So in Bellagio, we identified AI as a potential force multiplier, but also a threat multiplier, with destabilizing effects from the technology in itself or from its use. So, and one of the aspects that we covered was proliferation risks, especially to name-state armed groups, and then the destabilizing effects of it. Would you be able to talk about it in 3 minutes?
I'll try. So we identify 4 types of proliferation, 4 drivers of destabilization risk. The first relates to AI's role in operational tasks. This entails risk for decision-making and operational failure, as well as disproportionate collateral damage. And the second drivers for destabilization is the arms race. Given the fact, as Jasmine mentioned, AI has been widely recognized as a force multiplier, as well as essential pillar for strategic surprise. If one country's deployed AI-powered systems, it will disturb the regional and international arms dynamic and leading to an arms race. And third, drivers will be proliferation risk. One good example would be the peaceful use of nuclear energy. In a previous research of mine, we find out that AI has been widely used and has great potential in nuclear material production, especially the most proliferation sensitive stage, which is enrichment and reprocessing. So this entails a risk. And lastly, AI has the potential to provoke political, economic, and societal disruptions. A good example, as we all know, will be deepfake, which can be used for political sabotage, public opinion manipulation, coups, even civil wars, and can lay the foundation of even foreign military interventions. So for this last point, we mentioned it not because it's a security risk, but we want to emphasize the fact that it could be a military risk given the changing nature of modern warfare, including the hybrid warfare and the gray zone strategies. So specifically about the non-state military actors, so it's particularly challenging because on the one hand, AI is a widely recognized dual-use technology, so it means that those actors will have easier access to those technology as well as people who have knowledge about those technologies. And on the other hand, those technology, even though it's dual used and widely used in civilian field, are playing a more and more important role in modern warfares. So we should not overlook the complexity of the situation, and this is the challenge for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginger. So Ginger is also one of the authors of those famous RAISE essays. And I know that you're working on the essay with 2 co-authors who are from very different corners of the world. You yourself are affiliated with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and one of your co-authors is from India, and then the other one is in Ecuador. And the thing about AI in security and defense is that some of these issues, such as destabilization, are so sensitive and so complex that it's difficult to get people to talk about it in the first place. And you're managing to sort of collaborate with those collaborators from different corners of the world. So I was wondering if you can elaborate just in 1 minute, really, how RAISE is helping you form these cross-sectoral and cross-regional collaborations.
I have so much to say about that, but I will try in 1 minute. So I can imagine there's at least 3 layers of contribution for race in this effort. First, of course, the knowledge production. We have the policy brief, and we have a series of essays that we just mentioned. And secondly is the intellectual exchange. And we are such a diverse group, as Giacomo just mentioned, and there's by no means that we get together to reach a consensus. We get together to share our opinions, and when there's differences, and it actually helps us to identify the problems. And as we have already met for twice, I do see by myself that there's progress being made towards shared solutions. And thirdly, I would say that I recall in the first RISE meetings, many of us has been raising the importance of depoliticization, and as conflict resolution 101, you should always focusing on interest instead of positions. So this is exactly the value of this RISE, which provide a platform for all of us to get together to share our opinions, because at time that we realize states do identify their interest as their position, so this makes things very complicated. For example, in our gathering here, we don't have like the Russian delegation is not invited, but in our RISE discussion, we do have one Russian senior research colleagues joining, so their opinion is taken into considerations. So this is. So as Giacomo just mentioned, we are strive for diversity, and so you cannot just ignore one important players, as we all mentioned. Some of my colleagues mentioned that everyone should take responsibilities. Specifically about the non-state actors, Russia has been gaining lots of experience, real battlefield experience in that. So their opinion, of course, should be heard, but of course there's limitations. So this is the art of RISE, and of course our UNIDIR and Microsoft colleagues take the credits for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to wrap up with Kazuo as a last speaker before we open the floor to questions from the audience. And I'd like you, Kazuo, to kind of take us a little bit in a different direction and reflecting on your extensive experience with Hitachi following the multilateral negotiations on international cybersecurity, in particular the OAWG in New York, and really trying to expand based on your experience in following those processes. Where do you think that we can take this multi-stakeholder engagement forward? Like how should we take it forward? Why is it important? And particularly as a representative of the private sector, how do you think that industry can really help inform and shape this discussion?
Yeah, thank you for the great question. And I'm very happy to be the part of this team of RAISE. And 2019, I was asked to participate in OAWG without knowing anything what it is. But this can be a good one to contribute from private sector. And because the cybersecurity private sector is contributing quite a lot, and as a nature, not the government. And new things are coming as a threat. AI, I recognize that one of the threats, and the fusion and quantum, those are coming in the future. But there is no explicit wartime or peacetime to stabilize. But the new things are coming up, and how to make the policy always evolving. And the RAISE, when I was asked, it is really meaningful in a sense that neutrally, it can touch upon the particularly missing piece, which is military. Although the AI, there are a lot of great research happening in the non-military domains. So that's really the part. And the REAIS can do kind of independent study or specific recommendation, for instance, the first committee or any proposal very neutrally. So that makes really sense from my perspective. And always UN, the process is changing, but it's very difficult to engage from the private sector perspective to stabilize, but it's necessary, I feel, more and more for the technology evolution as a threat, as well as a really good innovation, certainly. And for military perspective, in fact, that private sector is very difficult to engage, in fact, because of nature of the national security or some of the secrecy. But as the US, DARPA, for instance, created the foundation of the internet. So the REAIS can do kind of the neutral kind of bridge involving the researchers as well as the good thinkers. So I'm hoping that REAIS can bring the very punchy as well as the very neutral, thoughtful proposal to UN system.
Thank you. And just building on that very, very briefly, why did you accept our invitation to participate in REAIS? Like we know that in industry you clearly have a lot to do, and it's not like you had some free time in your agenda. So what was the value proposition that really convinced you to be part of this initiative?
I don't say just for fun. Ultimately, the people, very balanced from different perspective, different country, culture, politically very neutral, and thinking through and discuss very openly. So those are ultimately I found. But at the beginning, of course, that you don't know by description, but to continue is that kind of open dialogue and the common goals that human, as a part of a humans community, we need to work with AI, not just philosophically or some part that criticize. So something meaningful, I feel, continuously. So, but it's of course a very difficult part. Technology per se cannot do, and one company or one country cannot do the things. But different perspective, international policy or guidelines and norms, however it can fit. But to openly discuss and find good actions. So I'm very hopeful to work with and live with AI.
Thank you, and thank you for your trust in the process. Okay, I think this concludes our series of presentations. We now have just over 15 minutes to answer any questions you may have from the floor. I'm just going to invite my colleague Michael to moderate this Q&A session, please.
Thank you indeed. So in the time we have remaining, we welcome any questions. We'll try to take 2 questions at a time if possible. I believe a colleague has a microphone, if I'm correct. And so please wait until you have the microphone. And if you're comfortable doing so, please share your name and your affiliation. Any questions to begin with?
Thank you very much for these very insightful presentations from all of the speakers. My name is Ibrani. I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. And we had a very good cooperation with UNIDIR yesterday. And I just want to bring into as well, to relate what we discussed in yesterday's breakout session where we talk about bridging, the developing countries ability or capability in terms of how we deal with the AI in military purposes. So what I want to understand, I mean, to hear from is how do we leverage, I mean, from developing countries' perspective, can we leverage from race processes or whatever your work in terms of building our capacity to deal with this new development for Indonesia and other, probably most of developing countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Second question.
Hi, I'm Pat Fitch from Los Alamos National Lab in the United States. I thought one of the examples that was particularly unique, and I haven't heard in the other sessions, was of looking at non-proliferation. As I think Ginger brought this up, I'd like to hear if there's other examples that are military related but aren't actually a military application like non-proliferation that you thought about.
You take the first.
Giacomo, please.
Yeah, I can take the first question. I think that what you asked in a way perfectly aligns one of the purposes that REAIM has with a core component of the mandate that UNIDIR has of supporting capacity building and the informed participation of states. So one of the reasons why we're looking at the opportunity of bringing REAIM at the regional level is exactly to be more granular and to be able to reach developing countries, developed countries, because I think there is a lot to benefit from increasing the dialogue between countries that are within the same region but might be at different levels of readiness or maturity when it comes to technology development and adoption. So one of the reasons why we want to go to the regions is exactly to be more efficient in the way in which we reach individual countries that might be in need of help. In addition to that, we're always, as UNIDIR, but also as REAIM, we're always available and very happy to look at how we can support specific national needs when it comes to training, education, or capacity building. So please, this is an answer to you, but also to everyone else that is here in the room or that is following us online. If you would like to work with us on these topics, please do reach out.
Yasmin, do you want to add to that?
Sure. So in addition to what Giacomo has presented in terms of our plans to go to the regions, I think in the meantime, so Giacomo has mentioned it, in the lead up to the REAIM Summit, there have been a series of regional consultations in which I took part in. And one of the key sort of takeaways from the regional consultations was that there was a huge appetite for multi-stakeholder perspectives. Regions across, states across regions wanted to know about what the multi-stakeholder community thought about AI governance in the security and defense domain, but no one could agree on how to do it. So in the end, by disagreeing on how to do it, then in the end, no conversation is happening. And this is where REAIM is stepping in by providing you the much needed multi-stakeholder perspectives that we are generating as a group in the meantime, but obviously we also understand the need to gain granularity at the regional level and the sub-regional level to take into account context and realities in the region, which obviously we're trying to incorporate already from the beginning by being inclusive in the way we approach our discussions. But at the same time, there's only so much we can do by all being in one certain point of the world without locally being in the region. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you both. I think a more specific answer to the question is that the roundtable should come to Indonesia. So we will see you there. 2 thumbs up, it's official. In terms of the second question, I have a sense that both Alexi and Jingja would like to tackle this. Is that right?
So thank you very much for the questions. So I will not repeat with the same concept with WMD because I sense that you are in biosecurity and you have a panel yesterday. But I will say that my recent project last year at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies deal with how counter-AI techniques may affect the satellite remote sensing analysis. So in terms of satellite remote sensing, it's a very typical dual-use technologies, where on the one hand, it can be used for civilian use, and also at the same time it can be used for non-proliferation and arms control missions. But at the same time, the technology can be used for military purpose. So this is a very typical example of dual-use technology. And as far as I know, some of the lab in America has already applied AI technologies in their satellite remote sensing, for example, for defog and target recognitions. So this is something that definitely I'm interested in and should caught more of our attentions. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll add a little bit to that. As you probably gathered, our kind of consideration of life cycles is non-domain specific. So the risks and opportunities that are presented by our understanding of, say, the end of life of AI, as well as the interstitial bits where handoff happens, is yes, it presents particular opportunities and dangers that might have unique outcomes in the military domain, but they also are contextually applicable across non-military uses of artificial intelligence. So this is a case of if you solve it here, you solve it everywhere. So there's a value that's effectively not self-limiting. The other bit I'd say that unfortunately, the colleague that this conversation happened with isn't here this time, but a conversation I had in the wings of RAISE last time was with a colleague of us who's working on adversarial AI, and there were discussions that came out of that, how that approach could actually be useful for the provision of humanitarian assistance in terms of injecting clear information into data sets to ensure protection, as well as including means of actually using the same AI tools that this company was producing for the defense sector that could actually mean that we are better enabled, prepared, and effectively resourced to provide aid in the most difficult to reach and complex environments. So this isn't a group that is purely constricted by the defense domain narrative and concepts of security by any means.
Thank you, Jingjae and Alexei. Another question, please. Anyone else? If not, recognizing the time, can pass back to Unidir for closing thoughts.
All right, absolutely. Thank you, Michael, and thank you for the questions from the floor. What is left to do is really to reiterate that this is the beginning of a journey, and we hope that this journey will continue, will expand, will develop, and ultimately will deliver positive impact at the multilateral, regional, and national level. We are very excited about this initiative. We really truly believe that there is a lot that the multi-stakeholder community can provide in support of this AI governance efforts, particularly those in the context of the security, the military affairs, the military domain that are still relatively new compared to where other discussions on AI are. And we haven't mentioned it fully yet, but we think that this is also the initiative through which we hope that some of the hard lessons that have been learned in the civilian applications of AI can also be bridged into the military context, because sometimes, and coming from a past in that community, I feel okay in saying that sometimes when we think about the military affairs, it's like, if the military are thinking about something for the first time, assuming that's the case, then nobody else has thought about it before. But that's not necessarily the case. Some of these problems have already been analyzed and maybe to a certain degree already partially resolved if we look at the civilian domain. So there are a lot of lessons that can be learned, and hopefully we can leverage mechanisms like RAISE to bring those lessons in and share them with the community that works on defense and security. So I invite you to please go read our policy brief that is available on Unidir's website. There are a lot of interesting observations in it. Be on the lookout both for the series of essays that we mentioned, and you got a little bit of a sneak peek in terms of some of the key themes that these essays will cover. And also wait to hear from us and receive the invitation to join us for the first RAISE Global Conference next year, that we really hope to, again, continue to inject knowledge, expertise into this discussion. So I wish you a great continuation of the REAIM Summit. We have half a day to go. I really would like to, in closing, express my gratitude, first and foremost, to my colleague Yasmin for being a great and the real pulsing heart of this initiative. So thank you, Yasmin. Thank you to all of the panelists for sharing your views. And of course, last but not least, thank you very much to Microsoft for your trust and your support and for believing that Unidir would be the right partner to embark in this very important initiative. So thank you very much to all of you for coming here in the room or for following us online. Thank you.